Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close, the candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes to life. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. The grease trap behind Romano's fine dining smelled like death at 2:47 a.m., but Miguel Garcia had stopped noticing an hour ago. His younger brother Danny worked beside him in silence, both of them elbow-deep in industrial gray water, scrubbing at baked lasagna that had fossilized on serving platters sometime during the dinner rush. "Last one," Danny said, holding up a plate crusted with what might have been tiramisu. At 15, he still had that puppyish optimism that made him volunteer for things like this. Extra hours on a Saturday night, the promise of free ravioli dangling like a carrot Miguel knew they'd never see. Miguel, who was only 17 but wiser by 2 years, just grunted. Manager Rick made a lot of promises tonight. "Stay late, help us out, I'll make it worth your while." The worth had been 3 additional hours of chemical burns and dishpan hands, while the rest of the staff filtered out by midnight, leaving just the 2 of them and Rick himself, who had disappeared into his office around 1:30 and hadn't emerged since. "You think he forgot?" Danny asked, reading Miguel's mind the way younger brothers sometimes could. "He didn't forget." Danny's face fell. Miguel felt bad for maybe half a second, but the kid needed to learn. People like Rick, middle management types who wore ties to work at Italian restaurants and called teenage boys sport, they made promises like other people made small talk. Easy, meaningless, gone the moment it became inconvenient to remember. The kitchen lights hummed overhead, fluorescent and hostile. Miguel's back ached, his shoes squelched with dishwater. The clock on the wall read 2:53 a.m., and outside the window above the industrial sink, Tampa's summer night pressed against the glass like something alive and waiting. "Come on," Miguel said finally, pulling the plug and watching the gray water spiral down with a wet sucking sound. "Let's get out of here." They changed out of their aprons in the staff room. Really just a converted storage closet with a bench and some lockers that didn't lock. Miguel's 1991 Honda Civic sat alone in the parking lot, looking somehow smaller and more pathetic under the sodium lights than it did during the day. Danny climbed into the passenger seat and immediately started fiddling with the radio. "Leave it," Miguel said, turning the key. The engine coughed to life, and static filled the car until Danny found a station playing something soft and jazzy, the kind of music their mom listened to while she drank her morning coffee. They pulled out of the lot at 2:58 a.m. The streets were empty. Tampa at 3 in the morning was a different city entirely, hollowed out, stripped of its daytime skin. Miguel drove the route they always took, the long way that avoided the highway because his Civic shook at speeds above 55. They had done this drive dozens of times over the summer, but never this late. Never when the stoplights blinked red, yellow, red against nothing, timing synchronized for traffic that didn't exist. Danny yawned. Miguel kept his eyes on the road. The radio played something slow and mournful, a saxophone that sounded like longing. Miguel's thoughts drifted to the $73 he had made tonight. Extra hours, time and a half after midnight. He was saving for community college. Danny was saving for a car of his own, though at this rate it would take him until he was 20. That's when Miguel first heard it. A buzzing, low and persistent, weaving in and out of the saxophone like a second melody. He frowned, listening closer. Not quite buzzing. Humming, maybe. Musical, almost pretty in a weird way. "You hear that?" he asked. Danny had been half asleep, head lolled against the window. That sounds like humming." Danny lifted his head, listening. The saxophone continued its melancholic wail. Underneath it, that other sound persisted, higher pitched, almost melodic. "I thought it was you," Danny said. Miguel shot him a look. "Why would I be humming?" "I don't know. You were humming along to a different song than what's playing." "I wasn't." Miguel reached for the volume knob and turned it down. The saxophone faded to silence. The humming didn't. It continued, clearer now without the radio to mask it. Definitely humming, definitely melodic, and definitely not coming from either of them. Miguel's hands tightened on the wheel. "Danny?" "Yeah, I hear it now." Danny's voice had gone thin. The humming had a quality to it that made Miguel's skin prickle. High and sweet, almost childlike. A little girl's voice, maybe, or something trying to sound like one. It carried a tune he didn't recognize, something old and sad and somehow wrong in its sweetness, like candy that started to rot. Where's it coming from? Danny twisted in his seat, looking into the empty back seat, then at the dashboard, then at the vents. Miguel didn't answer. He was focused on the road ahead, on the intersection looming before them. They were coming up on Del Marby Highway, the light ahead blinking red in the darkness. And beyond it, he slammed on the brakes. The Civic lurched to a stop, seatbelts catching hard against their chests. They both sat there, breathing hard, staring at what lay to their right. The cemetery. Myrtle Hill Memorial Gardens spread out in the darkness like a city of the dead, rows upon rows of pale headstones catching the ambient light from the street. The wrought iron fence seemed too delicate to keep anything in or out. An angel statue near the entrance spread stone wings against the night sky, its face eroded smooth by decades of Florida rain until its features were a blank and terrible nothing. The humming hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten louder. The sweet, high voice threading through the car's interior like smoke, filling every space, impossible to escape. Miguel could feel it in his teeth, in his bones. The melody rose and fell, patient and inexorable as breathing. "Miguel?" Danny's voice cracked on the second syllable. They looked at each other, really looked, the way you only do when something has gone deeply, fundamentally wrong. Danny's face had gone pale, his eyes wide. Miguel knew he probably looked the same. In the cemetery, nothing moved. The headstones stood silent and still. The angel statue's empty face stared at nothing. But the humming continued, coming from everywhere. A little girl's voice singing a tune that had no words, that maybe predated words entirely. Miguel's mind supplied helpful, terrible details. They were parked directly in front of the main entrance. The clock on the dashboard read 3 a.m. exactly. The witching hour. The dead hour. The hour when the barrier between worlds wore thinnest. The volume knob on the radio was turned all the way down, the radio itself off, but still the humming persisted. Not from the radio, Miguel thought. "Drive!" Danny screamed, the word tearing out of him. "What are you doing? Go!" Miguel's foot hit the gas, and the Civic lurched forward. They blew through the red light. Not that it mattered. Not that there was anyone else on the streets to hit or be hit by. Miguel kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look right, refusing to acknowledge the cemetery as they passed it. The humming followed them another block. 2 blocks. 3. Danny was still twisted in his seat, looking behind them. Then his eyes went wide, fixed on something over Miguel's shoulder. "Miguel," he whispered, "don't turn around." But Miguel's eyes had already flickered to the rearview mirror. In the back seat, barely visible in the darkness, sat a little girl. She was maybe 7 or 8, wearing what looked like a white nightgown. Her hair hung in dark tangles around her face. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. And even in the mirror, Miguel could see that her eyes were wrong. They were too dark, set too deep into her head. like looking into wells that had no bottom. She was humming. Miguel's foot slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The speedometer climbed past 55, past 60. The Civic shook and rattled, but he didn't care. Danny had pressed himself against the passenger door, as far from the back seat as he could get, and Miguel kept his eyes locked on the road, because if he looked in that mirror again, he might start screaming and never stop. The humming continued all the way home. Their house appeared like a refuge, the porch light burning yellow in the darkness. Miguel had never been so happy to see that peeling paint, those overgrown azaleas, that cracked driveway. His mother's car was in its spot. The kitchen light was on. Miguel threw the car into park and they both scrambled out, their hands shaking too badly to work the seatbelts properly. They stumbled toward the front door and heard it. Giggling, high and bright and delighted, coming from behind them. From the car, the sound of a child who'd just played the best game, who'd won the best prize. Miguel spun around, his heart hammering. Through the Civic's back window, he could see movement, a flash of white sliding across the seat. The giggling grew louder, more gleeful, and then the sound began to fade, growing distant, as if small feet were running away down the street, deeper into the neighborhood. Miguel's eyes scanned the darkness, but he saw nothing. No white nightgown, no tangled hair, no little girl. Just the empty street and the sodium lights and the night pressing in from all sides. Then silence. Danny had frozen on the front steps, his face the color of milk. They stared at each other, then back at the car, then at the street where the giggling had faded. Nothing. Miguel's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get his key in the door. When they finally stumbled inside, they found their mother at the table, exactly where she always was at this hour. Rosary beads clicking through her fingers while steam rose from her coffee cup. She looked up as they entered, and whatever she saw in their faces made her set down the cup. Then her eyes moved past them to the open doorway, to the darkness beyond. Her expression shifted, something ancient and knowing moving behind her eyes. She stood quickly and shut the door, locked it, then turned to face them. "Tell me," she said, already reaching for her rosary. "Tell me everything." What followed was a ritual Miguel had seen performed 100 times, for departing travelers, for the sick, for new babies and troubled dreams, but never with this urgency, never with his mother's hands moving so quickly through the beads, never with her voice so sharp and focused as she prayed in Spanish. The old prayers, the ones that predated the conquest and had been dressed up in Christian clothing to survive. She draped the rosary across both their hands, the beads cool and solid against Miguel's skin. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in rational explanations and the scientific method and things that could be proven. But he had seen the little girl in the back seat. He had heard her giggling as she left their car, and his hands trembled as he held the rosary, mouthing the words along with his mother because what did it hurt? What did it cost to say a prayer for whatever had shared its song with them in the darkness? Just to be safe, he told himself, just in case. When it was done, his mother made them coffee, real coffee, strong and bitter, meant to keep them awake and anchored to the world of the living. They sat at the kitchen table as dawn began to gray the windows, and she listened to their story without interrupting. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You don't go past that place at night anymore," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "No, Mama," they agreed in unison. She nodded, satisfied. Good. Some places they remember things. Some things want to be remembered. She touched the rosary around her neck. "You were lucky tonight. Lucky you stopped. Lucky you didn't stay stopped. Lucky she decided to leave when you got home." Miguel thought about the intersection, the blinking red light, the cemetery gates yawning open in the darkness. He thought about the moment of paralysis, sitting there while the humming filled the car. What would have happened if they had stayed longer? If they had turned off the engine? If they had looked at her directly instead of in the mirror? And what would have happened if she hadn't gotten out? If the giggling hadn't faded? If she had decided to stay? Lucky, his mother had said. Miguel wasn't sure he believed in luck any more than he believed in ghosts, but he believed in the sick feeling in his stomach, and the way his hands still shook around the coffee cup, and the memory of those dark, bottomless eyes staring at him from the back seat. He believed that some things couldn't be explained, and he believed that tomorrow when he went back to Romano's to collect his paycheck, he would tell manager Rick to keep his promises and his extra hours. Some things weren't worth $73. Some things weren't worth any amount of money. Danny was already nodding off, his head drooping toward the table. Miguel reached out and steadied him, guided him toward the stairs and bed. His mother stayed at the table, rosary moving through her fingers, lips forming prayers that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be heard. The sun rose over Tampa like it always did, burning away the shadows, making the night seem distant and impossible. But Miguel knew better now. He knew that some nights lingered, that some songs couldn't be unheard, that some passengers chose their own stops. He knew that the next time he drove past Myrtle Hill Memorial Gardens, even in the broad daylight, even with the radio playing loud, he would check the back seat first, and he would drive just a little bit faster. The giggling had sounded delightful, playful, like a child who'd just gotten away with something wonderful, like she'd be back. Miguel finished his coffee and climbed the stairs to his room. He didn't undress. He lay on top of his covers, staring at the ceiling as the room grew lighter, and when he finally did drift off, his dreams were filled with music, a sweet, high humming that rose and fell like breathing, and underneath it, the sound of a little girl giggling in the dark. The next night, the humming would find different listeners. The cemetery still keeps its own schedule. The little girl in the white nightgown keeps her own hours. And somewhere in Tampa, on some dark street at 3 a.m., another car would slow down at another intersection. Another driver would hear the humming. Another rearview mirror would show a small figure in the back seat, hands folded, eyes like wells. And when they got home, if they were lucky, if she decided they'd been good company, if she'd enjoyed the ride, they would hear her giggling as she left, if they were lucky. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carman's crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media, or on my website, carman-carrion.com. Who knows? Your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed, and remember, in Carman's crypt, every fear comes to life, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.